Hello, welcome to Peace Pursuit. This is a podcast designed to help people. You've found my very first session, and I'm hoping to develop a set of several episodes, all designed to help people come to peace from trauma. And I'll talk more about what I mean by peace in a future session. You don't find the English word trauma in the Bible, but Scripture does have a lot to say about the issue. The Bible uses several different words to describe trauma, words like affliction, sorrow, brokenness, wounds, despair, oppression, grief, and a lot of others. The Bible deals with the topic of trauma all the way from beginning to end. Within the first few chapters of the Bible, Cain murdered his brother Abel. Imagine how horrific that was for their parents, Adam and Eve. From there, all the way through the Old Testament and then all the way through the New Testament, you have one tragedy after another. My goal in these podcasts is to share some scriptures with you that you can help find real peace if you're struggling with trauma yourself, or if you're trying to help someone who is struggling. These passages of Scripture have been helpful to others, and I believe they will be helpful to you. Before I do that, allow me to take just a minute to introduce myself. My name is Curt Jones. My wife and I have been in ministry for 45 years. We spent the first half serving as a pastor of 2 churches in the Pacific Northwest. We spent the last half working with a mission organization, helping train church leaders in several different countries, and serving as part of a member care team that reaches out to missionaries. Now, I would assume that at least some of you to whom I'm speaking are good in a crisis. If something happens, you just seem to know right away what to do, and you can calmly take action to solve the problem. And if you are one of those who are good under pressure, I have to say that I am not one of you. In fact, I am notoriously bad in a crisis. It's not that I panic or lose my ability to think. In fact, my problem is the opposite. I am an underreactor. I naturally tend to downplay crisis. In fact, I tend to downplay just about everything so that nothing is quite as bad or as good as it seems to everyone else. So I am not the guy that you want to find you lying unconscious somewhere. Most likely, I will not even notice you. But even if I do, I might walk past you anyway, assuming that you will probably be okay. About 25 years ago, when my kids were still in high school, my daughter was standing at the kitchen counter one afternoon after school, eating a snack. I was sitting at my desk just a few feet away from her, and she started coughing hard. She was not sick. She had something stuck in her throat. So what should I do? Well, the first thing any crisis expert will tell you is that you must remain calm. And I did that. I remained very calm through the whole ordeal. And then I pointed to the sink, which was behind her. And that's it. That's all I did. Which may seem a little odd to you, but I had just read something earlier that if a person is coughing, then they're not actually choking. Now, don't take that as sanctioned medical advice. It's just something I read. But I knew that she didn't need the Heimlich maneuver. What she needed was a drink of water, which was in the sink that I was pointing to. Well, she did survive, and I now realize that I could have gotten up and given her something to drink, but I don't know, that seemed like a bit of an overreaction to me. Since then, this has become one of those iconic family events that will not die. Even still today, 25 years later, if someone in our family starts coughing, someone else will usually point to a sink. Now, here's the whole point of my story. Downplaying a crisis is not the same thing as finding peace in a crisis. In the same way, putting trauma behind you, getting past a painful experience, trying to ignore the suffering, or minimizing the seriousness of a trial are not the same thing as coming to peace. And I want to help people actually come to peace. So let's read a passage of Scripture, 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 1 through 11. Starting at verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Succoth, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Succoth and Azekah in some place I can't pronounce. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah and drew up in the line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield-bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now, I'm sure that many of you recognize this event as soon as we started reading. I don't know how many times I have told the story of David and Goliath. I've told it in vacation Bible schools, Awana clubs, Sunday school, Bible camps, and so on. This is one of my favorites. In fact, I even have a puppet skit that I developed, which if you thought I was going to perform for you here, you've got another thing coming. Why did the Lord include this story in the Bible? What is it doing here? How should we apply a narrative like this? I think the answer to that question is found in another passage of Scripture, Romans chapter 15, verse 4, where we read, "For whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope." The Old Testament gives us examples from which we can learn to follow or learn to avoid. But today, I'm not really going to focus on David. I want to focus on David's brothers, the armies of Israel. What can we learn from them? By the time we find King Saul in this chapter, he had already been told that someone else would replace him as the king of Israel. David was already anointed as the next king. David and Saul already knew each other. The armies of Israel and the armies of the Philistines also knew each other. About 27 years earlier, when Saul was just getting started as the king of Israel, there was a battle in which about 600 Israeli soldiers defeated about 6,000 Philistine soldiers, only through the power of God. Now the Philistines are back. The Philistine armies were gathered on one side of a valley, the Israelite armies on the other side, in an area just a few miles outside of Jerusalem. But this time, the battle was not going to be army against army. The Philistines had a new warrior named Goliath, and the Philistines were almost as proud of Goliath as Goliath was proud of himself, almost. Goliath came from a family of giants, but most likely he was even larger than most of the giants in his family. He was somewhere between 9 and 11 feet tall, depending on how you measure a cubit. But he was not just intimidating in his size. His armor was also intimidating. A brass helmet, a coat made of brass plates that weighed 125 pounds, brass boots, a brass neck covering. He also had offensive weapons, one of which was a huge spear that was like a beam. The head of the spear weighed 15 pounds. And then he also had a huge shield that had to be carried by another armor bearer. And Goliath came out with this challenge. You can see it in verse 10. I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. This challenge went on for 40 days. The same thing happened every day, 2 times a day, for 6 weeks. The armies would gather, Goliath would repeat the same challenge, and the soldiers would panic and run back to their tents to hide. The same exact thing happened 2 times a day, every day, for 6 weeks. Now, imagine getting up every morning, looking at the news, and you see the same story every day for 6 weeks. Nothing new happened today. And then every evening before you go to bed, you check the news again, and it's the same story. Yeah, news companies would go out of business if they covered news that way. The average lifespan of a news story that isn't dramatically changing is about 7 days. So there are exceptions to that, of course, but that's about how long we will follow a typical event. Most likely, you've already forgotten most of the news stories that were in our attention back in late September. David's father sent him to the battlefield to bring food to his older brothers who were part of the army. The nation of Israel had a low military budget, so the soldiers were volunteers. And not only did they not get paid, they even had to supply their own food or depend on their family to bring it to them. David came with food for his brothers, and while he was there, he could see for himself what the soldiers had been going through for 6 weeks, right? If you look down at verses 23 and 24, as David talked with his brothers, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were very much afraid. Even though they heard the same challenge 2 times a day, every day, for 6 weeks, they still had the same reaction. They panicked and ran back to their tents terrified. I think it was a lot like playing with a jack-in-the-box, right? It doesn't matter if you're 1 year old or 50 years old. You're turning the crank, and you know what is going to happen. You know exactly when it's going to happen, but it doesn't matter. You still jump back in fear every time it does happen. That's sort of the experience of these soldiers. So I want to ask you a question. How could we help David's brothers with their fear? How could we help them find peace? Now, we usually use David's brothers for comic relief in this story. We sort of make fun of them. We treat them as the idiots of the story. But this was a terrifying situation for them. So let's take this seriously. Let's imagine that Eliab, David's oldest brother, comes to you for advice. And he says to you, I'm getting a little tired of panicking and running back to my tent every day. This just doesn't seem very mature. Can you help me with this? What would you do? How would you help him? Where would you start? Or maybe you've been through a traumatic event yourself, and maybe you're wondering, how can I find peace in the middle of this? Today, I just want to share with you quickly 3 issues that should be at the top of your list if you're going to try to help someone or deal with trauma yourself. And my purpose is just to introduce these to you today. And we'll get more in depth as we move through this topic in the coming weeks. But first, you need to decide what your goal is. What are you trying to accomplish with Eliab or with your own trauma? And how would you know if you've actually helped him? What would you set as your goal as you try to help him? Or what about your own experience of trauma? How do you know when you have been helped? What is it that you're looking for? There are a lot of possible answers to that question. They may be different for each person. But Eliab didn't tell us how he felt here, so I can't say this with authority. But putting ourselves in Eliab's place, I think we can come up with some reasonable ideas about how he felt. Okay? Eliab did not feel safe, and he wasn't safe. He was in a traumatic, dangerous situation. I'm sure that Eliab did not feel heard. Right? Goliath did not ask Eliab any questions about how he felt or what he thought they should do to settle this battle. Nobody really cared about what Eliab thought. It was also clear that Goliath did not respect Eliab or any of the other soldiers as human beings. Now, these are fairly common goals that people have when they've been through trauma. They want to be safe. They want to be heard. They want to feel valued as a human being. And these are reasonable desires. But there may be more achievable goals that we need to pursue. A goal needs to be measurable. It needs to be achievable, right? Are these the kind of goals that we can actually accomplish? Making someone safe, making sure they're heard, or making sure they're respected? Maybe, but we're never sure. Is it actually possible for me to make another person feel safe? Not really. I can listen to someone, and I need to listen, but will that cause the person to feel like they've been heard? Maybe, or maybe not. Can I communicate worth and value to another person? I can communicate it, but will he or she receive it? Believe it? Maybe, maybe not. So as I try to help Eliab, I want to try to pursue goals that can be achieved, that can be accomplished. Okay? And I think there are at least two goals that would be worthwhile in his situation. One, I can help Eliab respond to trauma and its triggers in a way that really pleases God. And number two, I can help Eliab move through trauma in a way that leads to peace. So that's where I need to start, is by setting realistic, achievable goals in my effort to try to help him. There's a second issue that we need to deal with. Okay, we need to address Eliab's beliefs. When Goliath issued this challenge, Eliab had a decision, all the soldiers had a decision to make. The question was, who or what are you going to put your hope and trust in right now? The soldiers' answer to that question was established long before Goliath and the Philistines ever showed up to harass the nation. These were beliefs they had from the beginning. If you've been in a fearful, dangerous situation, you know that there are physical reactions to danger. Your heart starts beating faster, adrenaline kicks in, and there are other almost automatic responses physically. You don't make any of those things happen. You don't choose them. It seems like an instinctive, automatic response to danger. But at the same time, Jesus taught us in Matthew chapter 12 that everything we do and everything we say comes out of that which is in our heart. What does that mean? I believe it means that our physical reaction to trauma may be automatic, but it is set in motion by what we believe in our hearts. It helps me to understand the heart by reducing it down to its most basic form. And I think we can boil the heart down to two basic issues, the two basic driving forces. Those are what we believe and what we want. I think those two expressions help us understand the heart. So what did Eliab believe? What did the soldiers believe? Well, I think we can know what they did not believe. They did not believe that God really mattered in this at all. Even though they have seen God fight for them before, they have watched God defeat their enemies. He was not expecting that to happen this time. In these past 6 weeks, there has been no mention of God whatsoever. They don't even think about his presence. God is not mentioned until David showed up. The soldiers believed that they were doomed. They believed that there was no good way out of this crisis. And that's why they are freshly startled and panicked every day, 2 times a day, for 6 weeks. As Eliab was running back to his tent, he was not shouting, "God, I trust you to help me." Instead, he was saying to himself, "Goliath is going to kill us all." That's his belief. And it was this belief that led the soldiers to be so afraid, to panic, and run back to their tents. So the second issue we need to deal with is beliefs. And then the third issue we need to deal with and prepare for is desire. What did the soldiers want? Well, I think we can say they wanted safety, like any other human being would want. Now, I think that's why they were so afraid. It was obvious to them that they had no control over this. They could not guarantee safety for themselves. We could also say they wanted comfort. They wanted to be back home where they had their families and their lives. These are things that any of us would want if we were in their situation. These are not wrong desires. There's nothing wrong with wanting those things. I think most of us would want the same things. The problem is that these legitimate desires come from a heart that is deceitful, corrupt, and beyond our understanding. And because of that, our desires easily become demands. So their desires were not leading them to God, to trust him or depend on him. Their desires actually became God to them. He is serving. They are serving their desires, expecting their desires to be served by others. And that's what was causing the panic and the fear. Now, these men were in real danger. This was a crisis. They didn't just decide to panic and run. This was an automatic response. They did it without even thinking. But it was his response because of what they believed, because of what they wanted. Think about this. David's brothers went out to battle 2 times a day, every day, for 6 weeks. And in all that time, the Philistines never actually did anything. Goliath never did anything. All he did was talk. But David's brothers were being defeated every day for all 6 of those weeks. What was it that was actually defeating them? It was not the Philistines. It was not Goliath. It was their own thoughts, their own beliefs that were defeating them. Their fears literally replaced God and his truth. And because of their beliefs and their desires, they were being defeated every day by an enemy that was actually not doing anything to defeat them. Can you identify with the brothers of David in this? Perhaps your response is not the same as theirs. Their unwanted response to trauma for you might not be fear, might be anger, or a sense of hypervigilance, or something else. It's not very likely that you are going to be able to just stop being afraid. I know when I'm afraid, I cannot just talk myself out of it, or just stop being afraid, or stop being angry, or stop being hypervigilant. As much as you try to convince yourself, or as much as other people try to convince you to stop responding in these ways, we need more than that. We need more help than that. This is just the beginning of what I hope to work through. But if you are struggling with your own response to trauma, I would encourage you to spend a chunk of time working through an honest, thoughtful response to some of these questions that I'm going to ask right now. Or if you're trying to help someone, consider asking the person these kinds of questions. Here's the first one. As you think back on your traumatic experience, what was the worst part of that experience for you? What was the worst? A second question. What do you believe God was doing while you were going through the worst part of your experience? What was God doing right then? And I'm not looking for a Sunday school answer here. I want you to think about what you think, what you believe about that. What was God doing when you were going through the worst part of your experience? A third question. What do you wish God would have done in this event or this trauma? And why? Why do you wish he would have done that? A fourth question. As you work through your response to this traumatic event, how would you know that you have successfully dealt with it? What specifically are you hoping to accomplish in this? And then the last question I want to suggest. What are some specific ways you will know that you have come to peace over this trauma? How will you recognize that in your own life? I hope this has been an encouragement. Bye for now. I hope to see you again next week on Peace Pursuit.